Shalom, my name is HaMashayach, and all praises to the Most High and His Son, HaMashayach. Today's topic is going to be concerning the history of the cradle of Mesopotamia and the posterity of Egypt. We will utilize the basis for the class by going into a few different books in the early 1800s and the 1900s. So what we're going to do is a comparison and analysis study. The main book will be Crania Egyptica. It's a 19th century book. So we're going to extrapolate a lot of information out of there. As we go through these books, you will see the bigotry and the biased concepts and theories in those books from those centuries regarding the Negroes and who they are. We will start with the Zondervan Bible Dictionary, and we're going to begin with Ham. The definition of Ham: the youngest son of Noah, born probably about 96 years before the flood, and one of 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes. So who are the Negroes? But they're not from Ham. And it reads, but the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, the Libyans, and the Canaanites. His indecency, when his father lay drunken, brought a curse upon Canaan. Right, so that's talking about Canaan, who came from Ham. And there's been many theories about Canaan, but the Negroes are not from Canaan.
So let's look up some more.
So next, as we went through the lineup,
Libyan.
we're going to go to the next brother, which is the Libyans.
Alright, so it says here Libya, the ancient Greek name for northern Africa, west of Egypt, gives you scriptures. Cyrene was one of its cities. Cyrene. We know about a couple of people from Cyrene. We know a couple of witnesses that came and helped the Messiah, HaMashayach, with his tree or cross or beam to the cross. He was from Cyrene. All right, so that's part of North Africa, and they said that there were Jews in Cyrene, which is Libya.
Okay, first we're going to read about Canaan. And it reads here, it says, Canaan was the son of Ham in the genealogical list in Genesis 9 and 10. His descendants occupied Canaan and took their name from that country. Genesis 9:18, 22, Genesis chapter 10, verse 6. It says, Canaan was one of the old names for Palestine, the land of the Canaanites, disposed by the Israelites. The etymology of the name is unknown, as is also the earliest history of the name. But Egyptian inscriptions of 1800 BC use it for the coastland between Egypt and Asia Minor, basically where Jerusalem lies was all Canaan, all the way up from the southern kingdom to the northern kingdom, up near Syria. So it says, the Canaanites were of Semitic stock. Wrong. Absolutely wrong. As we just read about Ham, it says that the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, which are the Cushites, the Libyans, which is Put, and the Canaanites are the stock of Ham. So they're Hamitic. Canaan is not Shemitic or Semitic. So this is wrong. The Canaanites were of Semitic stock and were part of a large migration of Semites. What he's saying basically is that the Israelites dwelled in that land and they came out of that land. They were not Canaanites. They were Hebrews. They came out of that land, but they were not Canaanites. It says the Phoenicians, Amorites, Canaanites. That's why a lot of the Israelites were known as being Phoenicians. Same thing. From northeast Arabia in the 3rd millennium BC, they came under Egyptian control 1500 BC. The Israelites were never able completely to exterminate them. All right, we read about that in the book of Exodus. Moses and his men were supposed to execute, and it went on to the next generation with Joshua. They were supposed to execute all the Canaanites, and it never happened. Look at down below it. It says Simon the Canaanite, so-called in Matthew 10 and 4. But in ASV edition, the Canaanite, margin, or zealot, one of the original 12 apostles. Below it we read, it says Canaanian. The description of Simon the zealot in Matthew 10 and 4. And it says in this edition, ASV, but Canaanite by mistake in KJV. Probably zealot, Luke 6:15. From an Aramaic word is the correct description. He was never a Canaanite. It was a mistake. He was from Cyrene. He was from Libya, but he was an Israelite that dwelt in Libya. So they're also saying that this was a mistake. There are a couple of context errors in the scriptures. When you look at the stranger law about do not abhor Edomite, in the Strong's Concordance it shows that it is a Syrian. Do not abhor Syrian. So there's some context errors in the scriptures that got lost due to translation. But other than that, we're seeing an error here in this book, the Compact Bible Dictionary. No one's perfect. We all make mistakes. But it's our jobs to strive to be perfect and to extrapolate information and correct information, if possible, if need be.
Okay, so Matthew chapter 27. Matthew 27 and verse 32, it says, and as they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. Now, the interesting thing, it says that we read in the Bible dictionary, it said Simon the Canaanite. And in this one, it says Simon the Cyrenian. Now, Simon the Cyrenian, as we just read a definition of Libya, it said that Libya, or Cyrene, is in Libya. So you got two different cities here, but you got a title for Simon coming from both of these places. Some called him the Canaanite, some called him the Cyrenian from Libya. Basically, what it's telling you is that the Libyans and the Canaanites were dark people. Very, very dark. And so for Simon to come from there, that's what they called him. Just like they called one of the prophets in the book of Acts. So Acts 13. Right here. The book of Acts chapter 13, it says, oh, there were in the church that was at Antioch certain prophets and teachers, as Barnabas and Simeon, that was called Niger, and Lucius of Cyrene. All right, so you got Niger. That's also from Africa.
What I want you to do is to look at where the placement of Niger is. And now look below it to the east of Niger. Southeast, you see Benin. And right next to Benin, or right below Benin, is the Gulf of Africa. Okay, there's a gulf there. And that gulf is where the Portuguese and the Spaniards came. Right below Benin, also to the southeast, is the Kingdom of Wida, which is also called the Kingdom of Ajuda, which means help, or Judah. So why is it so difficult for people to understand that the Israelites fled to West Africa when you have prophets that showed up in the book of Acts that were from the same area? See, people don't think. They think that it was so far away from Israel, but it wasn't that far. It wasn't that far. It's So you had a whole congregation of Israelites dwelling in West Africa. So Niger wasn't that far. Also, when we read in the book of Acts chapter 13, it says, as Barnabas and Simeon that was called Niger, and Lucius of Cyrene. We know that the Cyrenians were black. They were up there, up northern Africa, where the Canaanites and the Libyans dwell. And Mananian, which was up in Antioch. So you had Greek-speaking Jews in Antioch that could have possibly also been black. And that's what we're going through today, to show you that they were black, which had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch and Saul. So it's evident that these Israelites came as far as from West Africa to Northern Europe to even the farthest part of East Asia. Okay, so we're going through these scriptures just to bring some truth out, to show that the Negroes were actually in biblical times, serving as prophets, serving as servants. All right, we're going to go into this book that I love to reference, and it's called Nature Knows No Color Line by J.A. Rogers. We're going to go to the first page of this book, and it says, Nature Knows No Color Line, Research into the Negro Ancestry in the White Race by J.A. Rogers, author from Superman to Man, Sex and Race, World's Great Men of Color, etc., etc. I got all these books. Very good books, especially Sex and Race. Okay, now it says, Beauty, thou wild, fantastic ape. This is a poem. Who dost in every country change thy shape? Here black, here brown, here tawny, and there white. So every shade of brown is what he's describing. And what he's describing is the Negro. And this was written by Abraham Cawley in 1618 to 1677. It says, Thou art white and I am black, but day must join with night to bring forth the dawn and the twilight, which are more beautiful than they. This is by poet Victor Hugo. Now, this is also a poem that's representing and distinguishing how beautiful black, the colors of black is. Okay, down below it says Helga M. Rogers, probably was the editor, but then it says law firm, etc., etc. So we're going to go into this book. We're going to go to a book that a lot of you brothers aren't familiar with. It's called Lectures on Physiology, Zoology, and the Natural History of Man, delivered at the Royal College of Surgeons. Pay close attention to this. The prologue, or the subtitle of the book is Lectures on Physiology, Zoology, and the Natural History of Man. It was delivered by the Royal College of Surgeons by W. Lawrence, FRS. If you look down, this is the third edition. And it was in London, printed for James Smith, 163 Strand, 1823, the year of 1823. So a lot of these books, if you notice, during that year, a lot of the books that were spearheading racism was around that time, to discredit the Negroes on any fashion. Anything that we brought to the United States was discredited. Any inventions that we had was discredited. Everything that we did was discredited. And so it's good to go through these books to find out how these men thought, how their scholars and surgeons thought about manipulating our thoughts and manipulating our history. It all started here. Everybody had an any on it. So let's read. All right, so I'm going to go into this book. I'm going to go to chapter 9, and I'm going to go to page 431. And I just want to read this to give you a brief understanding of how their research is concerning all the ecosystem, including human beings. And so with this, I'm going to read page 431. And mind you, their experiments and their analysis are not, it's 20% of 100%. It's not 100% correct. All right? I'm going to read I'm going to say 20% because we know in part, we prophesy in part. And a lot of this was very biased when they were putting this together from the get-go for the powers that be that govern the land. So they had to suffice them before they sufficed the natural coexistence of man's understanding. So let's go to 431, and it reads, Chapter 9 of the causes of the varieties of the human species. It says, having examined the principal points in which the several tribes of the human species differ from each other, namely the color and texture of the skin, hair, and iris, meaning the eyeball, the features, the skull and brain, the form of proportions of the body, the stature, the animal economy, the moral and intellectual powers, I proceed to inquire whether the diversities enumerated under these heads are to be considered as characteristics, distinctions, co-eval with the origin of the species, or as the result of subsequent variation, meaning the different changes of people or the different complexity of certain races. And in the event of the latter supposition being adopted, whether they are the effect of external physical and moral causes or of native or congenital variety, the very numerous gradations which we meet with in each of the points above mentioned are almost an insuperable objection to the notion of specific difference. For all of them may be equally referred to original distinction of species. Yet if we admit this, the number of species would be overwhelming. So he's telling you, we can't admit that all species are the same. We cannot admit that from the different lineages and tribes that there's more variation than just one variation. So they know if they're going to say there's white Jewish people, then there's black Jewish people too. So they're doing this study, and mind you, this is just an analysis. This is not the word. This is just the analysis, because they were inquiring what made us all different. So these studies were done. This is why you have to read and study from each different background of subject. It's not just one background of subject like history. You got to go into the medical field. You got to go into the ethnography, the ethnicity of people, where they're from. You got to go into all of that. Page 447. And we're going to read 447, and it reads, I highlighted this. It says, the Jews, for example, are fair in Britain and Germany, browner in France and Turkey, swarthy in Portugal and Spain, olive in Syria and Chaldea. So he says they're olive in Syria and Chaldea, meaning they're the color of an olive. Have you ever seen any green people? The color of an olive? No, it's black olives. So these people in Syria and Chaldea are very dark, like Paul was very dark. Okay, like we read in Acts chapter 13, when it spoke about the city called Manaen, very dark people, Helenin, Israelites. Israelites who converted to being Greeks. And this is a similitude to what we just read in Nature Knows No Color Line about the different shades of brown with Negroes who are actual Israelites. So let's go to page, I'm going to go to one more page in this book. And let's go to page 462. And like I always say, these books were never supposed to be in our hands 100, 200 years ago. But now we have access to it, and now we have to extrapolate from it. And so we're going through these different categories of science and history. So this is page 462, and it reads, it says, though many of the Asiatic nations who inundated Europe in the 6th century had a very dark complexion, it appears that the shades of color observable among the white race are less owing to their origin or mixture than to the local influence of the climate. This influence appears to have almost no effect on the American and Negroes. All right, so what were we before we were Americans, and what were we before we were called Negroes? So in the 6th century in Europe, that's when the Dark Ages took over. That's when Tariq overcame Europe. Okay, so we're going to go back to Nature Knows No Color Line by J. Rogers. I'm going to go to page 55 because Europe said they were inundated with people of color coming there. And the closest continent to Europe is Africa and Asia. So those two continents were full of people with color. So I'm going to go to, this is page 55 of chapter 5. It's called Racial Intermixture in Spain and Portugal. I'm going to read these two paragraphs. And it reads, while white Vandals were pouring into Africa in the 4th and 5th centuries, talking about the Romans, the Vandals, the Goths, were all pouring into Africa at that time. Africans continued to arrive in southern Europe, chiefly as slaves. Okay, because we were slaves even from the Roman Empire all the way down to the end of the Roman Empire, time that they broke up. But in 711 AD, they came in as conquerors. Crossing into Spain, they captured Gibraltar and defeated the Goths. See, white Germanic invaders of 3 centuries earlier. Their commander, Tariq, a negro, gave his name to Gibraltar, formerly Cap. These Africans were Moors, sometimes called Arabs, because of their language. To the earlier Greeks, the Moors were a black or dark people, Maros, and to the Romans, Maras, a black woolly-haired people, known synonymously as Ethiops, Niger, meaning Negro, and Afar, African. Even as late as the 5th century AD, Procopius, Roman historian, calls the people of Morocco black. All right, so this is the whole deal with the Israelites. We were in that wave of people of color going into Europe during the 7th century. This is how Spain and Portugal got inundated with black people. I try not to skip another brother's puddles of research, but sometimes you just can't pass up a gold nugget. And so I want to bring out this book called Light and Truth, because this is perfect. It's the perfect setup for this paragraph that's in Nature Knows No Color Line. So, on page 339 of Light and Truth, written by Robert Benjamin Lewis, who, by the way, was a brother. This was in 1844 in Boston. So on page 339, it reads, the word Negro. It says, Negro is derived from the Latin term niger, like we read about in the book of Acts, meaning black. The following terms and definitions are in the American edition of Dr. Walker's dictionary. Moor, a marsh, a fen, a Negro. Marat, a fen, a bog, a swamp, a plant. Moorish, fenny, marshy. These are the definitions for Moor. Negro, blackamoor. A blackamoor was a black and Arab person mixed. Now let's drop down. In Dr. Johnson's Dictionary, American Edition by Reverend Joseph Hamilton, M.A., 1810, we find these words thus defined. Black, dark, cloudy, mournful, wicked. Black, a Negro, the dark, color. Mourning, Moor, definition, a negro, marsh, fen, bog. Moorish or Mori, definition, marshy, fenny. Negro, definition, a blackamoor, a Moor. In the Dictionary for Schools by Dr. Webster, American Edition, we find these words thus defined: Negro, an African by birth, or a descendant of one of full blood. Descendant of what? Of full blood. Moor, a black man, a marsh. Negro, a blackamoor, a slave, a mean wretch. All right, jump over to the next page. And it says skin. He calls it the blood of Africa, or their descendants, as follows. Now let's drop down where it says Micah. It says Micah, the Morishite, a prophet of the Moors. So if he's a Morishite, who is he a prophet of when it says a prophet of the Moors? This is the same Micah that's in your Bible. This is the prophet Micah. It said that he prophesied in the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah, and speak to all the people of Judah, the Moors, saying, Thus saith the Most High of Hosts, Zion shall be plowed like a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps, a forest. So here we are showing that the Israelites were all Moors, or Morishites, if you want to call it that. Okay, I'm going to bring out one more. I'm going to go to page 73 concerning the Moors. Well, in the Moor thing, this right here. I keep on going. Lesson. If you see nature knows no color line, if you go to page 73, we'll start with the second paragraph. Here it says, the Roman Maurus occurs in European languages as Moor, Morian, and scores of other forms. For instance, the Italian dictionary says Moro, Umo, Neuro, Diot, black man of Ethiopia. The Century Dictionary says Moor means blackamoor. Hence, Morian, Moresque, Morisco, Morris. It is much the same in the Teutonic languages. The word Moor in German, says Stoll, was exactly equivalent to negro in the time of Othello. Next paragraph. Moor, for negro continued to be in general use in England until at least the 18th century. Nathaniel Bailey, compiler of the first English dictionary, 1736, has Moor, or Moor, French, Moor, Italian and Spanish, or Black Moor, a native of Mauritania, which is in Africa. Dr. Samuel Johnson, 1755, has Moor, Maurus, Latin, a Negro, blackamoor. Now here's the kicker. I'm going to read this last paragraph. And it reads, mulattoes were called Tawny Moors, and sometimes Tawny Moors. All you mixed brothers, you all are considered Tawny Moors. Bailey says there were one born of parents of which one is a Moor and the other of some other nation, or white. Albino Negroes were called White Moors. This latter was also a nickname in Spain for usurers. It says Niger, the ancient African word from which evolved Negro. Niger, Nagra, Nagrum of the Romans. This is when they started to supplant Ethiopia. So now you have a breakdown of Moor. And you know what it means and where it comes from. The white race comes out of the Moors, not the other way around. So we're going to go to page 122, and we're going to start at, let's go down to the last paragraph. And it starts out with as. So it says, as was already said, the ancient Jews who left Egypt must have been quite negroid. after mating with Egyptians and Ethiopians for centuries. They were probably even originally negroid. I read that again. They were probably even originally negroid, talking about the Jews. Abraham, according to the Bible, came from Ur of the Chaldeans. Chaldea was the seat of the Sumerian civilization, which was long considered to be white Aryan. Okay, these are white Indians. And it reads, but it was negroid, said Spearing in the Childhood of Art. So he's telling you that the information that he had received from another author, which said that the Aryans were white, was contradicted by another author who had factual information who said that they weren't white. So it says, the discovery, he says, was very disconcerting to literally historians when philologists for that race was proved to be not a branch of the civilizing Aryans, nor of the gifted Semites, but of a negroid people having affinities with Mongols. The only problem with the scholars from back in those days, including J.A. Rogers, is they didn't distinguish the difference between Negroes. As you heard, he said that the Semitic race was different than the Negroes. So back then they didn't have the information or the knowledge that certain Negroes were Semitic, and the ones that they're talking about could very well be African or Hamitic. It seems like there was some confusion. Du Lafoy, also in his researches, said that the Elamites, who once dominated in that region, were Negroes. So the Aryans, who were the Elamites, because Elam and Shem are cousins. And if one was black, the other one was black. So it says one of their kings is mentioned in connection with Abraham in Genesis chapter 14. It reads, below that it says Strabo, 30 BC, who was a scholar of that time, says the people of Western Judea were a part Egyptian ancestry, because you had a lot of Israelites who dwelt in Egypt during that time. This is why the angel came to Joseph and told Joseph to flee to Egypt so he could blend in. But he says, although the inhabitants are mixed up, thus the most prevalent of the accredited reports in regard to the temple at Jerusalem represents the ancestors of the present Judeans, as they are called Egyptians. Tacitus of about 90 AD says, many assert that the Jews are an Ethiopian race. And we just told you what the Ethiopian race represented, Negroes. It doesn't necessarily mean Ethiopians. For Romans to have taken them for Ethiopians is clear indication of their color, since the Ethiopians were definitely black to the Romans. See that? And if you notice on the side of this, I put Acts 21 and 38. Well, Paul was mistaken for an Egyptian. When you read that chapter, why was he mistaken for an Egyptian? Obviously, he was dark. And then when he spoke, they said, how can you speak Greek? Because they thought he was an Egyptian. We're going to do a study on Crania Egyptica. This is a book called Crania Egyptica, or Observations on Egyptian Ethnography Derived from Anatomy, History, and the Monuments by Samuel George Morton. And as we look at the publisher's notes, it shows when this book was published. Originally, it was published in December 16, 1842. Now, the Civil War jumped off about 20 years after this. So a lot of Negroes were enlisting voluntarily into the war to fight for America. But 20 years before, a lot of the surgeons and the scholars, during those times, there was a pledge to put out as many books as they could discrediting our race, regardless of how many inventions we brought to America, regardless of our genius for engineering, such as building houses and the layout of streets like in Washington, D.C., regardless of our nobilities from Africa and Europe, regardless of their beauty. So the research and their false evaluations had to make us appear to look and think as a beast. That's why you see that book called Negro, a Beast. They had to do this so they would be justified for our slavery, so they would be justified for being good Christians. Because if they allowed us in their wicked system to be humans, then their hypocrisy for being good Christians and research would show them basically to be liars, and them showing themselves to be worse than beasts. So this is why they had to take all the history, regardless of what nationality, but of colored people, and mostly Negro ancestry. They had to change it or make fun of it, so we wouldn't have anything to hold on to show that we were dominant race. So the Negro word is a buzzword for Israelite. The Negro word is a buzzword for Israelites because when you search through history, you cannot find, in the biblical days, Negroes in any book. So what you have to do is you have to think a little bit and say, okay, let's go through their research and find out when they use Negroes, how did they use them, and where did they use them, to prove that we have to do this to prove that we were in the Bible. Okay, so I'm going to go through this book. This is a good observation of what I'm implying about. So we're going to go through this book. If you go to page 3 in this book, page 3, there's a subtopic that says Negro race. And I'm going to read this. I may get long-winded reading this, but you got to follow along. And it says, the true Negro confirmation requires no comment, but is necessary to observe that a practiced eye readily detects a few heads with decidedly mixed characters, and this is something they always do. Now, we know the Negroes come in various shades of brown, many different textures of hair. You see that with in America with New Orleans. You got all different shades of brown. Some brothers got straight hair, some brothers got curly hair, some brothers got wavy hair, some brothers got woolly hair. So look at how they say things in this. So he says, it detects a few heads with decidedly mixed characters in which those of the Negro predominate. For these, I propose the name of negroid crania, meaning negroid skulls. For while the osteological development is more or less that of the Negro, the hair is long but sometimes harsh, thus indicating that the combination of features which is familiar in the mulatto grays of the present day. He's trying to say that these Negroes in his study that were in Egypt were mixed people. But all you got to do is look around and see how we are here. It says, it is proper, however, to remark in relation to the whole series of crania that while the greater part is readily referable to some one of the above subdivisions, there remain other examples in which the Caucasian traits predominate. Right. See how they merged themselves in? These people were very racist, pushed themselves into history of the dark races. It says, but are partially blended with those of the Negro, which last modify both the structure and expression of the head and face. What you have to understand is the Caucasian race during that time were not the dominant race. The black race was the dominant race, but this is a way of themselves pushing their heritage into our existence of dominance. We proceed in the next place to analyze these crania individually, arranging them for the purpose of convenience into 7 series according to their sepulchral localities, beginning with the necropolis of Memphis in the north. First series from the Memphite necropolis. Now listen to this. This is the whole country of Egypt. And you have to know there were various cities in Egypt. And so we're going to read this. They have bullet points of where they excavated. And I'm going to read it. It says A, Pyramid of 5 steps. B, Saqqara generally. These are places. C, front of the brick pyramid of Dashur. D, northwest of the pyramid of 5 steps. E, Tura on the Nile, second series from the grottos of Mabde. Third series from Abydos. Fourth series from the catacombs of Thebes. Fifth series from Kume Ambos. Sixth series from the island of Bega near Philly. Seventh series from Dabad in Nubia. And then it has another subtopic, first series, 26 skulls from the necropolis of Memphis. Okay, now we're going to go into it, and I just want to show you guys how they broke this down. And when we go to page 6, this is coming from the 4 heads from the grottos of Mabde near Margaret es Samun, plate 4, category 836. And it's talking about a female head of fine oval form with broad convex forehead, low coronal region, and strongly aquiline nose. This head retains a profusion of long, fine, curling hair, and the face is gilded over the eyes and lips. This is a striking example of the tumid face, which is not unfrequently seen on the monuments. And then it tells you what it is, Egyptian form. Now look at these remarks. It says the 2 negroid heads belong obviously to the lower class of people, for the bodies have been hastily and imperfectly embalmed, without mummy cases, and in ordinary wrappings. The 2 latter remarks apply to the other individuals of this series, which have nevertheless been much more carefully embalmed. Okay, so here's the thing about the embalming. If you were of a low caste in Egypt, you weren't carefully embalmed. If you was of some kind of a nobility or one of the pharaoh's or overseer's right-hand man, you was carefully embalmed. An example of that would be Joseph in the scriptures. Joseph rose up in status in Egypt based on his prophecies and his closeness to the pharaoh or to the overseer. And due to that, when he passed or when he died, he was carefully embalmed. Okay, so this is our reference going into the Negroes being in Egypt, because they're saying the Negroes in Egypt, they weren't being called by Negroes in Egypt during those days. So who could this possibly be? Who were close to the Egyptians, as we read in the book of Exodus chapter 1? It was the Israelites. As we read on, when we go over to the 4th series on page 7, it says 55 heads from the catacombs of Thebes. If you look at plate 7, because a lot of these are Egyptians, a lot of these are other races too, but for the most part, when I say other races, I'm talking about like Nubians or Ethiopians. But when you look at plate 7, figure 3, category 857, it says a female cranium, long, narrow, and much flattened at the sides, and rather ponderous. The whole face is long, angular, and prominent, with a slight yet manifest negro expression. A little hair remains long, black, and smooth. How come it don't say woolly? 83, it says IC 83 cubic inches, FA 77. It says Egyptian blended with Negro form. See that? So a lot of these are question marks when they throw the Egyptian form, but they're sure of it that it's Negro. Remember it says predominate on page 3. The Negro form is predominant over most of these skulls in Egypt that they had excavated. You look at page 9, it shows 2 heads of lunatics from Thebes. Right. I just want you guys to pay attention to Thebes, because they're going to engulf all the catacombs with this Thebes, because they're trying to extract things that make sense. And they're trying to understand, why are Negro heads or skulls everywhere? Why are they in the East? Why are they in Asia? Why are they in Europe? Why are they in Greece of Europe? They're extracting these heads, and they're trying to understand, how come it's more of the Negro heads than anything everywhere in the East? And you don't see it now. So we're going to go to Negroid heads. I have it highlighted, and I'm just going to read down. It says, in addition to the two heads of this class of Mabde and one from Memphis, which is in Egypt, I shall join descriptions and outlines drawings of 5 others from Thebes, which are here grouped for the advantage of more ready comparison. Just so you know, Thebes, if you Google Thebes, you'll find out that Thebes is not only in Egypt, but also in Greece. So you had catacombs in Egypt, and you had catacombs in Greece. Now you have to ask yourself a question. If there's a city of Thebes in Egypt, why is there a catacombs of Thebes in Greece? Reason being is because we took our names with us to those cities. Things that were familiar to us that looked like our old cities, we started to name them after our old cities because they favored our old cities. So that is why you have a Thebes in Greece. It's in likeness to the Thebes in Egypt. We buried our loved ones there in those catacombs. Another thing, for those of you who are saying, why are there catacombs in Egypt, is because this is not necessarily during the time of the pharaohs of Egypt, the ancient pharaohs. This is right before the Punic Wars happened. This is when a lot of Israelites were going back to Egypt, and they were serving in their army, and they were more of a mixture of people in Egypt at this time, of the Hamitic races and of the Negro races. Let's drop down to figure 1. So it's category 864, a female cranium of a narrow oval form with a low receding forehead, small nose, protruding face. There is much of the negroid expression in the bony structure of this head. All right, and it gives cubic inches, so forth. They're doing a systematic excavation where they're keeping notes of everything that they pull for a report. And this is good for us, because now we have understanding of why we're in Egypt. Because you have to say to yourself, how come no one else talks about us being in Egypt? They're examining these scrolls to find out what? To find out what race of people were there. So this proves that these excavations of negroid skulls shows that we had a place in history. 858. A large and rather ponderous cranium with a well-developed forehead, salient nose, jaws powerfully developed and protruding, and the upper teeth presenting obliquely outwards. Category 855. Category 885. An oval head with a convex frontal region, small depressed nose, and very projected face. Look at figure 4. Category 852. A small head with a low receding forehead and strong small nose, projecting maxillary, an obvious negroid or negro expression. A little hair remained, which was cut short and was coarse without being woolly. So just imagine this: these people are gathering skulls of Negroes. Let's go over to the next page. So these items are evidence for our existence in the east of Africa, the continent of Asia, and Europe. And with all this information coming out, some of you will still deny after seeing this, but we are uncovering our items that prove not only were we slaves in Egypt, but also the early Christians in history were also in Egypt. And what we did was we dug catacombs on our return to Egypt during or before the Punic Wars happened with Hannibal. If we go into Frank M. Snowden Jr.'s book called Blacks and Antiquity, there's a lot of pictures showing how we were in these areas. Here's a statue, and it says terracotta statue of a juggler from Thebes. This is on page 240 of this book. And then it has three other examples. It shows a bronze of a dancer, Hellenistic, from Carnuntum. So what you're seeing is these were jobs that we had, because just to live in Greece or Rome, you had to make money. So a lot of our people did things like this to make money. They were dancing, they were singers, they were actors. Same thing as we have here in America. Same thing went on then. Shows a bronze statue of a dancer, Hellenistic. 104, bronze dancer from Herculaneum. Hellenistic. What does Hellenistic mean? It means Jews who became Hellenic. Hellenistic means the Greek era. And a lot of Jews became Hellenic. Who do you think those Jews were that became Hellenic? You're seeing them. Yeah, let's go to page 253. It says, a Hellenistic terracotta from Taranto has preserved a Negro wearing a loincloth and holding castanets in his hands, like the dark-skinned dancer in Helenin fresco, figure 119. This terracotta may be a record of African tribal dances popular in Italy. So if you look on the stage, you'll see dancers in the back, but you also see like a minister in front, and someone is kneeling. These guys are kneeling or praying. And you see the priest standing there with the white robe, and look at his hair, it's woolly. Then if you look on this page, it's the same thing. They're doing some kind of offering right there, a sacrifice. And then you got the priest standing in the back, and all these men are down below him. Or he could be an actor. But it says Dark Isaac Cultus from Herculaneum wall painting, Neronian age. So all of these things are Hellenistic. Let's go to page 97 in this book. Just want to show you how we were in Asia, because a lot of you don't believe we were in Asia. With this, it says, black marble head of a youth from Asia Minor, 2nd century. Hair and thick mass of curls. Slight broadness in nose and thickness in lips. See that? Those are brothers and sisters right there. 75. Penellic marble head of a young man found in Agora category 250-260 AD. Close cropped hair, nose broken, lips slightly thick. And that was a symbol. If they broke the nose, either you committed a crime or you didn't give up what you believed in. So a lot of the Israelites who didn't change their religion got their nose off if they had statues. These were portraits. What you're looking at. 59 and 60 speak seemingly negroid features and of a distinctly negroid look in describing the statue, but notes that the hair is not usually curly, like we read in the observation book. Same thing. Because we found that they had found some skulls that had curly hair. So it's not necessarily that we always have woolly hair. Let's go to page 91. Image 67. It shows marble statue of a negroid woman interpreted as a personification of Africa, 1st century AD, or a little earlier from Lower Egypt. Features are clearly negroid with respect to rather broad nose and thick lips, although the hair is long, rather smooth, and loosely waved. Down at 165, down low, it states that the artist clearly wanted to depict the characteristics of the black race: flat nose, thick fleshy lips, and with the lower part of the face protruding, and adds that the long, smooth hair is evidence that the sculpture did not want to represent a pure Negro, but a racial type resembling certain populations of Abyssinia and South Ethiopia. The charming Negro woman, in my judgment, resembles descendants of black-white mixture. They love to put that in there. But before we go, let's go to page 73 because a lot of our people don't believe that we was beggars in Egypt. Look at this, page 73. Bronze statue of a beggar in Egypt, Alexandria, 1st century BC. Look at that. That's a brother begging. See that? Like HaMashayach said, you'll always have the poor. The poor will be here always. They ain't going nowhere. And let's go to page 89. And notice this is 64, picture 64. It states, bronze statue of a boyish orator, Hellenistic, Alexandrian, rather long, tightly curled hair, nose and lips, negroid but not extreme. What does that mean? C.C. Vermeil, Greek, Etruscan, and Roman bronzes acquired by the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, CJLV, 1960, 199, 200, and figure 7, for a study of several bronze statues of mantled Negro youths. What's interesting about this is during this time of the Greeks, remember a lot of our people were killed and the children were left over. And so a lot of the children were raised by Greeks. Some of them went to brothel homes. Some of them were adopted and raised by Greeks. So you're going to have a lot of children like this in the Hellenistic world that were of negroid, Hebraic descent. And so this is what we have here. Notice the robe, notice his hair, notice the bronze complexion on this picture. Look at 65. It says bronze statue of boy, perhaps also an orator, Hellenistic, tightly curled, short hair, round face, neither lips nor nose extreme, some subnasal prognathism, stomach somewhat protruding, 2nd or 1st century BC, discovered in 1963 in Rodrum by fishermen diving for sponge. Art treasures of Turkey, circulated by the Smithsonian Institution in 1966-68, Washington, D.C. When it says circulated, this is going from city to city to city, from country to country to country. It's like a show. They're doing a show with these different statues in different museums. Looking at this, you could tell that this is of Negroid origin. Why are they sculpturing young Negro boys in Greece? How did they get to Greece? And this says Turkey. So remember, the Grecians controlled, or the Hellenistic, the Grecians controlled from Greece all the way down to the Mediterranean area of Israel, Palestine, Egypt. They were there. They were in Asia Minor. They were in West Asia Minor, also known as East Africa. This is where they came from. This is where we came from. All right? And who was overcame during that time? It wasn't the Northern Kingdom. It was the Southern Kingdom. So this is who we have dwelling in the land of Greece during the Hellenistic times. All right, let's go back to Fania Egyptica. If we go to page 10, the 8th paragraph, and it reads, it will be observed, however, that the whole number of Caucasian heads is nearly the same in both tables, and that the relative proportion of Semitic, Negro, and Negroid crania is unaltered. So they had a table full of skulls. They had some Caucasian skulls on one table, and they had Semitic and Negro and Negroid cranias on other tables. And all the Semitic, Negro, and Negroid crania, they were all unaltered. And mind this, they all look alike too, these skulls. So the Negro and the Semitic person were one and the same. Let's go over to page 30. This is not even a full book. This is just a pamphlet. I have the full book. The second paragraph down, it reads, the vast influx of Negroes into the valley of the Nile must necessarily have left its impression on the physical traits of the Egyptians themselves. So who were coming into Egypt in vast quantities? Negroes. Where were they coming from? Asia. in modern times as seen in the Copts and in more distant periods as proved by the negroid heads in which both the configuration and expression are too obvious to be mistaken. But it may be inquired, how does it happen that Negroes or their descendants should be found in the catacombs? Now that's all catacombs. Even speaking of Europe, if they constituted a menial or a slave caste in Egypt? In reply, it may be observed that persons of this race have been capable, in all ages, of elevating themselves to posts of distinction in the East, and especially and proverbially those who have belonged to the class of eunuchs, those who were castrated, and slaves, like Daniel. Daniel was castrated. It is also important to observe that so tenacious were the Egyptians of the rights of their offspring that they admitted them to equal privileges with themselves, even when the mother was a slave, and these usages extended to inheritance, such as Moses, he received the inheritance of Egypt, and Joseph, who also received inheritance of Egypt.
Now these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt. Every man and his household came with Jacob. Reuben, Simeon, Levi and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful, and increased abundantly, and multiplied, and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people,
Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass, that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies, and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land.
Okay, so on page 30, let's go to the paragraph where it says delineations. We're going to read this and watch the thoughts that come out of it. They will not adhere to the fact that Negroes are the Israelites. So it says, the delineations of the Negro, which are supposed to be of the most ancient date, have not yet been identified with the epoch to which they belong, meaning the area of the Negroes. Where did they come from? What land did they come from? They're trying to figure this out. Such are those in a tomb at Thebes of the age of Amontutanach, an unplaced king, who was supposed to date prior to the 16th dynasty, and consequently more than 2,000 years before HaMashayach. There is, however, a difference of opinion on this point, but we can refer with confidence and certainty to the celebrated procession of the age of Thutmose the fourth at Thebes, in which Negroes are represented as tribute bearers to that monarch at a period which dates about 1700 years before our era. I want to go into the book of Josephus, and in the book of Josephus, I'm going to read Jewish Antiquities, Book 2, Chapter 7, and there's a prologue here in this chapter, and it says, which pharaohs ruled? And I'm going to read, it says, the Egyptian kings of the time of Josephus' adventure in Egypt, the oppression of the Israelites, and the Exodus are not identified in Josephus or the Old Testament. This is not identified either. It is tempting, however, to assign Joseph to the time of the Hyksos. We mentioned the Hyksos, domination of the Nile Delta during the second intermediate period of Egyptian history, 1700s to 1542, same as what we just read, when such Asiatic rulers might more readily have welcomed Israelites than if native Egyptians had been in charge. In that case, the latter king who did not know Joseph, Exodus 1 and 8, may have come from an Egyptian dynasty that expelled the Hyksos and launched the new kingdom or empire period. Isn't that interesting? Now, as we drop down, if we go back to Crania Egyptica, it reads, Sir G. Wilkinson describes a painting in the catacomb of Thebes of the age of Amenhotep III, in which that personage seated on his throne receives the homage and tribute of various nations. Among these are represented several black chiefs of Kush or Ethiopia, whose presence consists of rings of gold, bags of precious stones, a camel leopard, panthers, skins, and longhorned cattle, whose heads are strangely ornamented with the hands and heads of Negroes. The author justly adds that the latter effigies were probably artificial, for the people of Kush would scarcely have decapitated their own people to adorn their offerings to a foreign prince. Yet at the same time, these melancholy symbols were obviously designed to express the most abject self-abasement and vassalage. Now, this particular surgeon is talking about things that happened in history during the time of the Israelites. And when we read in the book of Josephus again, let's drop down on the same page from which pharaohs ruled. It says, this familiar pharaoh moved the Egyptian capital from Thebes, we just read about Thebes in Crania Egyptica, to the old Hyksos capital of Avarius, which the Hebrews called Ramses. Now, we just read about that. It says, the latter date also has better support from archaeological evidence at sites of Israelite conquests in Palestine. If a dating in the 13th century BC is correct, then the pharaoh of the oppression would seem to have been Ramses II and perhaps his son Merneptah, 1212 to 1200 BC, the pharaoh of the Exodus. Book 2, chapter 10, in the Jewish Antiquities, where it speaks about how Moses made war with the Ethiopians. It reads, I want to compare the two between Sir G. Wilkinson and what Josephus wrote. And it says here, 238, Moses therefore, when he was born and brought up in the foregoing manner, and came to the age of maturity, made his virtue manifest to the Egyptians, and showed that he was born for the bringing them down and raising the Israelites. And the occasion he laid hold of was this: the Ethiopians, who are next neighbors to the Egyptians, made an inroad into their country, which they seized upon, and carried off the effects of the Egyptians, who in their rage fought against them, and revenged the affronts they had received from them. But being overcome in battle, some of them were killed, and the rest ran away in a shameful manner, and by that means saved themselves. Whereupon the Ethiopians followed after them in the pursuit, and thinking that it would be a mark of cowardice if they did not subdue all of Egypt. Alright, so this is when Moses came about, and Moses brought fear to the Ethiopians. And Moses was a general in the Egyptian army. And what he did was, when he brought power of Egypt out to fight against him, that the queen of Ethiopia fell in love with him and offered him all types of jewels and gifts. And it's the same thing that we read about in Sir G. Wilkinson's of Crania Egyptica, when he talks about that they found various tributes of various gifts: camel, leopard, precious stones, rings of gold. Why is that in Egypt? Why is that during that century, during that period, during that dynasty where Joseph and Moses were living during the time of the Israelites? But when Moses received those jewels from the Ethiopians, as we read in Crania Egyptica, and as I showed you with the pictures, whose heads and hands were on these ornaments? They were Negroes. That is the missing link with science and history and geographers are not saying. Moses saw this jewelry. Moses was coming into the understanding of who he was and who he was there for. As we have read in the book of Josephus, he was there to what? Raise the Israelites. Raise them up. So here's Moses fighting against the Ethiopians, and he's seeing his family on these jewelries. I'm just trying to crack your thought process just a little bit. He's seeing his family on these jewelries, on these gifts coming from Ethiopia. You know, strangely ornamented with his brothers and his fathers and his sisters' heads and hands. So obviously this is telling us that the Negroes were the Israelites, because they were the ones who were served in captivity, and they were the ones who had multiplied in an alarming size, where the Egyptians feared for their lives, that they would make peace with those who were their enemies to fight against Egypt.
Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies, and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land.
Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramesses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service, wherein they made them serve, was with rigor. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of the one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said,
When ye do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live.
Now you have to ask yourself, why do they want these women of the Hebrews, these midwives, to slay the men child? Because if they slay the men child, then the Egyptians will start marrying the Hebrew women in the future. And then what would happen? There would be no more Israelites. There would only be Egyptian children. And we see that in the scriptures in Leviticus chapter 24 and 10, when it says, And the son of an Israelitish woman, whose father was an Egyptian, went out among the children of Israel. And this son of an Israelitish woman and a man of Israel strove together in the camp. Now this son lineage don't go back to the Israelites, because his father was the Egyptian. So now what is he? He is considered an Egyptian amongst the Israelites. So in today's time, they like to use matriarch to prove that you're a Jew. But in the old days and biblically, it's patriarch. It's based on your father, not based on your mom. You see? So the real Israelites are from their father's side, not from their mother's side. And so now you see what is going on in the world. Why everyone who claims to be a Jew claims their mother's side who is Jewish. And in real lifetime, it's really the father. So So they were trying to wipe out the existence of the ancient Israelites. And so when we read that in Crania Egyptica, page 30, when we could drop down the Clod Bay, it states the present black population of Egypt to be 20,000. And he adds that negresses, meaning women, form the greater number of women in almost every harem. And it says Egypt, I-1, page 329. Now, like I said, this book is bigger than what it is. I just have a pamphlet, and I also have the book. But as you can see, they're already starting to digress in Egypt. This is why the Most High had to come and send a Savior, because we were on the road to being wiped out in Egypt.
But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men and children alive. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives, and said unto them,
Why have ye done this thing, and have saved the men and children alive?
Because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively, and are delivered ere the midwives come in unto them.
Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying,
Every son that is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive.
Page 32. Drop down to the middle paragraph to the bottom here where it's highlighted. This is going into the Ethiopian dynasty here in the middle section, and the Egyptian kings. And I'm going to drop down to the highlighted area where it says that. So it says that those Colchians whom Herodotus mentions as forming part of the troops of Sesoris might have been negroes acting as mercenary or auxiliary solon. The army of Xerxes, which invaded Greece, was a legion of western Ethiopians who had hair more crisp and curling than any other men. Alright, so who are these Colchians? This book here is called The Occident, an American Jewish Advocate, Volume 22, January 1865. By Isaac Lacer. Let's go to page 510. Page 510. And it says, Dr. Joss in the History of the Israelites, Volume 5, page 233, quotes another account of the first settling of the Jews on the Malabar coast, which is derived from Jewish authorities, and states that a severe persecution led a great number of families after the destruction of the temple to remove to a distant land in the east. And accordingly, 10,000 souls wandered from Jerusalem to India, where they were all well received by the reigning monarch, Pirimo. This is said to have taken place AM 4250. Dr. Joss justly remarks that as a long time intervened according to the statement as to the date between the destruction of the temple and the arrival of the Jews in India, we may suppose that they came from Persia rather than Palestine, and were compelled to leave that country by a Persian rather than a Roman persecution. Although the history of the first settlement of the Jews in India is thus involved in obscurity, yet it is evident that considerable numbers of that nation have been found in that country during many ages. Let's drop down to the next paragraph. We learn from the work now before us that the Colchian, that's the same word we just read, that the Colchian Jews are divided into two distinct classes. One known as the Jerusalem, or white, the other as the Black Jews. All right, so which one was in Persia? It wasn't no white Jews, so it had to be Black Jews. It says the former are the descendants of the first settlers by marriage solely with one another. Their complexion is not European, but it is pale olive freshness most nearly allied to it. And the delicate carnation of the tips of the fingers proves that no native blood flows in their veins. This retention of complexion and features for so many centuries is truly astonishing when it is considered that the descendants of the Portuguese are generally of a darker hue than even the Aborigines of the country. What is that telling you? That all those Jews in Portugal were black from the 7th century on down. Introduction to African Civilization by John G. Jackson. Introduction by John Henry Clark. Foreword by Runoko Rashid. We're going to go to page 230. We're going to drop down to the last paragraph, and it reads, Lord Bertrand Russell, the eminent philosopher and mathematician, stated some years ago that many great men of the past listed in our history textbooks as white men were, if the truth were known, in reality colored men, meaning black. Offhand, we think of Spinoza, one of the great metaphysicians of all time, in that deservedly popular book, The Story of Philosophy. A chapter is devoted to the exposition of the philosophical system of Spinoza. The author of that work, Dr. Will Durant, gives a description of Spinoza as recorded by a contemporary biographer. To the portraits of Spinoza which have come down to us, Dr. Durant declares, we may add a word of description from Calerius. In the words of Calerius, he was of a middle size. He had good features in his face, the skin somewhat black, the hair dark and curly, the eyebrows long and black, so that one might easily know by his looks that he was descended from Portuguese Jews. So what's that telling you? That the Israelites were black-skinned people, just like the Colchins were dark-skinned people. They were from the Indians of the East, which were really black Jews who were misplaced. Just like the Israelites who were in Jerusalem, they had to be black because they came from Canaan and Egypt and parts of Africa. So those Israelites were all dark skinned, the color of bronze. On page 32, in Crania Egyptica, and we're going to start it now. It says, now, if the army of Xerxes embraced a legion of African Negroes, it would not be remarkable if the Egyptian troops should have been composed in part of the same people, which indeed, with respect to the Ethiopian dynasty, may be assumed as a thing of course. Now, we just read this whole thing, but remember what we read at the top. It says that those Colchins whom Herodotus mentions as forming part of the troops of Caesarus might have been Negroes. You see that? Don't forget. Remember what we're going over. So the Jews who were called Colchins were labeled Negroes by this author. And by all other Caucasian authors, they have labeled the Colchin Jews Negroes and tried not to put the two together. Let's go down to for the Meroites. For the Meroites were of southern Egypt. These were the kings of southern Egypt that tried to come back into North Egypt.
Until today, I always thought that the world's tallest people were in Holland and Latvia. And then I came to the country of South Sudan and I can't even touch the top of their heads.
South Sudan, as you can see, is a It's the land of the tall and dark. That's the first thing you're gonna see when you first come to South Sudan. And I love it. I love my height, and being here makes me love it and makes me embrace who I am and how tall I am.
The majority of the country's 13 million people belong to the Dinka tribe, who inhabit the banks of the Nile and have some of the most stunning physical features you'll ever see. They're extremely slim and tall, almost all of them, with both men and women averaging well over 6 feet tall.
The Hyksos, which were the Hebrews, ran them out. You've heard about the Hyksos. For the Meroites would naturally avail themselves of every expedient to establish their power by augmenting the number of their exotic confederates, and by extending to them those privileges which had once been sacred to particular castes. What particular castes? The old Egyptians, the first, second, third dynasties. They were all Nubian type. Very, very dark people, Hamitic people. Look at this. It says, for these and other oppressive acts, the Meroid kings were hated by the Egyptians. And no sooner were they expelled than their names were erased from the monuments. Why were the Meroites' names erased from the monuments? Because the Hyksos came in and changed those names, who were of Hebrew nationality. The third epoch dates from the conquest by Cambyses in BC 525 and continues through the whole of the Persian dynasty, or in other words, until the Ptolemaic era, BC 332, a period of nearly 200 years. Everyone knows that the Persians' dominion in Egypt was marked by an utter disregard of all established institutions. Where is that in the scriptures? The book of Tobit. If you go to the book of Tobit, that's when the Persian Empire stemmed from Nineveh on up. That's when they started. That's when the dominance started to come after the Babylonian kingdom fell. No occasion was omitted which could humble the pride or debase the character of the people. The very inhabitants of Europe, Asia, and Negrita poured into the valley of the Nile. See that? Abolishing in degree the exclusiveness of castes and involving an endless confusion of races. Okay, so when did the inhabitants of Europe pour in there? It's when the Grecians came down, right before the Punic Wars. Right around 193 to 300 something. I'm just guesstimating 300 and something BC. That's when, well, it says it right here, until the Ptolemaic era of 332 BC. Okay. Abolishing in degree the exclusiveness of castes and involving an endless confusion of races. So you see I put highlighted here Negro, Arab, Greeks in that order. And now the Arabs then took it back over. The prelude to these changes and misfortunes can be traced to the reign of Psammetichus I, who permitted to foreigners, and especially to the Greeks, a freedom of ingress which the laws and usages of the country had previously denied them. The same policy appears to have been fostered by the subsequent kings of the same dynasty until its consummation by Amasis, BC 569. So these kings were slowly getting softer and softer and letting many nations come in and destroying the ethnicity of Egypt. This is when, in the language of Champlain Fagiac, Egypt became at once Egyptian, Greek, and Asiatic. Because in the Ptolemy kingdom of Egypt, most of the soldiers were Israelites. And you can read that in the book of Maccabees, 2 Maccabees chapter 1. When in the language of Champlain Fagiac, Egypt became at once Egyptian, Greek, and Asiatic. Her national character was lost forever. Her armies were filled with foreign mercenaries. The throne was guarded by European soldiers and Negro soldiers, and continual wars completed destruction of a tottering kingdom. What I want to show you all is in history, whenever Israel went into a deployable kingdom such as Egypt or Persia and the Medes or Babylon, we were always given citizenship as slaves to participate in the things that citizenships pertain to different liberties of employment. So a lot of us became soldiers. So as we just read in the Crania Egyptica, that a lot of the Negroes became soldiers and warriors for these kingdoms. So the Europeans were the Greeks. The Negroes, you know who that is. Okay, so the Europeans not only were white people, there were also some colored people, black people. But I want to show you, what were the Greeks called in the scriptures? The Greeks were called Edomites, Macedonians, and Idumeans. So in the book of Josephus, when you go to page 363, book 11, chapter 3, Jewish Antiquities, and you go to section 859, and we drop down. That's actually section 860. It reads here, he also wrote to them that all the captives, this is when Zerubbabel was in leadership, and we were gifted back our land. And when we returned, our land was restored to us. And I'm going to read it. It says, he also wrote to them that all captives who should go to Judea should be free. Talking about the Israelites. And he prohibited his deputies and governors to lay any king's taxes upon the Jews. Remember, Haman was in Persia, and Haman had brethren that were Idumeans, which were Greeks. It says he also permitted that they should have all that land which they could possess themselves without tributes. He also directed the Idumeans and Samaritans, who are the Ethiopians, and the inhabitants of Coel, Syria, to restore those villages which they had taken from the Jews. When did the Idumeans take away the Israelite property? And when you read Psalms 137, verse 7, when it says, remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it, even to the foundation thereof. They took our land. So that's where you distinguish the Europeans from the Negroes. The Europeans were Idumeans. Oops. And they still can't place the missing link of who the Negroes are, but they can place the different nations in their positions in every kingdom. So we're going to look at the book of Josephus, and we're going to go into the Jewish Antiquities. This is page 395 of Jewish Antiquities. This is chapter 3, 119, section 119. And I'm going to read how we were in these kingdoms as warriors, citizens. And as we read, it says, chapter 3, it says, how the kings of Asia honored the nation of the Jews and made them citizens of those cities which they built. It reads here, the Jews also obtained honors from the kings of Asia, and they became their reinforcements. What is reinforcements? Okay, those are positions that they received as warriors or soldiers. It says, for Seleucus Nicator made them citizens in those cities which he built in Asia, and in the lower Syria, and in the metropolis itself, Antioch, and gave them privileges equal to those of the Macedonians and Greeks, who were the inhabitants, insomuch that these privileges continue to this very day. So you can see right there that we were soldiers in these kingdoms. And think about Persia and the Medes. Remember, you had Mordecai and you had Esther. They were holding high positions. Also, you had a Greek, a Macedonian, who was an Edomite, who was Haman. Haman were in this particular kingdom. And so this is why they match us up with the Macedonians and the Greeks, because even they were in that kingdom. You had all sorts of people in these kingdoms: Ethiopians, Libyans, Egyptians, all in this particular community that they label by name, but they do not label the Negroes in any of these kingdoms. But as we read in this other book, it said that the Negroes were also in these kingdoms, and they're not listed. So that would be the missing link. The Negroes are the Israelites. And so this is just one example. Let's go to another example in the book of Josephus. This is Jewish Antiquities, book 12, chapter 2, on page 390. And drop down to where I highlighted it in green. I'm going to drop down to where I highlighted it in green, and it says, King Ptolemy to Eleazar, the high priest, sends greetings. And Ptolemy was one of the men of Alexander the Greek who became a king of Egypt. Now it reads here, so this is after the Persian Empire. This is when the Persian Empire fell and the Grecians came into power. It says, there are many Jews who now dwell in my kingdom, whom the Persians, when they were in power, carried captives. Who did they carry captives? Israelites. These were honored by my father. Some of them he placed in the army and gave them greater pay than ordinary. To others of them, when they came with him into Egypt, he committed his garrisons and the guarding of them, that they might be a terror to the Egyptians. See that? And when I had taken the government, I treated all men with humanity, and especially those that are your fellow citizens, of whom I set free above 100,000 that were slaves. So we were slaves in Egypt, we were slaves in Persia, and we were slaves under the Greeks. Okay, and it says, and paid the price of their redemption to their masters out of my own revenues. And those that are of a fit age I have admitted into the number of my soldiers. So he paid off these guys, like in slavery. In order to take another person's slave, you have to pay them off. So this is what he did. If he found a young, fit man, strong, courteous, and attentive, he would buy them off the person who owned them and put them in his army as citizen soldiers. And for such as are capable of being faithful to me and proper for my court, I have put them in such a post as thinking this kindness done to them to be a very great and acceptable gift, which I devote to God for his providence over me. And as I am desirous to do what will be grateful to these and to all the other Jews in the habitable earth, I have determined to procure an interpretation of your law and to have it translated out of the Hebrew into the Greek, because they were speaking Greek in Egypt. They were speaking Greek and Egyptian. And to deposit it in my library, you will therefore do well to choose out and send to me men of good character who are now elders in age and 6 in number out of every tribe. What tribe? The 12 tribes of Israel. These by their age must be skillful in the law. So what was Ptolemy doing? He was having the Septuagint Bible created by the 70 elders who were in Israel, studying diligently to translate it into Egyptian and possibly Greek. Okay? This is how we got our Bible today. It had to happen. This is part of history. So who are these people who were slaves? They were Negroes. They were Israelites. Page 33, and let's go to number 7, and look what it reads there. It says, the Copts, in part at least, are a mixture of the Caucasian and the Negro in extremely variable proportions. Now, this wasn't during the glory or golden days of Egypt. This was at the end of Egypt during the Greek period. So the Greek armies had Greek generals that ruled over the rest of the soldiers, who were mostly of Israelite status or Ethiopian status, or of Egyptian status, or of Canaanite status. Number 8, it says, Negroes, here it is, Negroes were numerous in Egypt. See that? Numerous. The Israelites were all over Egypt. That's why the Septuagint Bible was written for the brothers in Egypt, because we were numerous in Egypt. But their social position in ancient times was the same that it is now, is that of servants and slaves. Crazy, right? Let's go to page 18. Page 18. And let's read what's highlighted in the middle paragraph, second paragraph. It says, Roman numeral 2, I use the word aboriginal in this place with some reservation. It has been supposed by learned authorities that Africa was peopled by Negroes before the Hamitic tribes entered that country. This is why we have Israelite dynasties in West Africa like Ghana, Mauritania, Niger, Cyrene, Angola, Cameroon, Israelite dynasties. I do not suppose Ham to have been the progenitor of the Negro race, and with Dr. Wiseman, Mr. Lawrence, and many others, I regard as a conjecture in science that doctrine which would attribute the physical gradations between the white man and the Negro to any other natural process than that of direct amalgamation. What we just read is the truth that the Negroes are Shemitic. Ignore the part where it says that we look like Caucasians. That's our natural caste. When the so-called white man got us from Africa and brought us over here to the Americas, they thought that we were mixed too, but it's our natural caste. We're beautiful people, and they want to be like us. The research in here, they've done some serious studies on the posterity of Ham and the Shemitic races of the Aryan, which are East Indians, not so-called Caucasian people, negroid races of the Shemitic races, which all blend into one. They're all related. So get an understanding of that we was in Egypt as Israelites. Let's go back to what's the name of the book? Nature Knows No Color Line. Let's go back to Nature Knows No Color Line. Let's go to page 122. And let's read that again. And we'll end with this. It says, as was already said, the ancient Jews who left Egypt must have been quite negroid. See that? After mating with Egyptians and Ethiopians for centuries, they were probably even originally negroid. Abraham, according to the Bible, came from Ur of the Chaldeans. Chaldea was the seat of Sumerian civilization, which was long considered to be white Aryan. It's not talking about Caucasian people. It's talking about East Indian people, enlightened. But it was negroid, said Spearing, in the childhood of art. So this particular author, Spearing, said in his book that they were negroid. The Discovery, that's the name of the book, he says was very disconcerting to literally historians and theologians, for the race was proved to be not a branch of the civilizing Aryans, nor of the gifted Semites, but of a negroid people having affinities with Mongols. Defoe also in his researches says that the Elamites, those are the Aryans, who once dominated in that region, were negroids. One of their kings is mentioned in connection with Abraham in Genesis 14. Of course they were Negroes because they came from Negroes. 30 BC says the people of Western Judea were of part Egyptian ancestry. How? 30 BC was when, during the time of 30 BC is when the Romans was ruling Egypt at that time. So of course you had a lot of Israelites dwelling in Egypt. But he says, although the inhabitants are mixed up, thus the most prevalent of the accredited reports in regard to the Temple of Jerusalem represents the ancestor of the present Judeans, as they are called Egyptians. Tacitus of about 90 AD says many assert that the Jews are an Ethiopian race. For Romans to have taken them for Ethiopians is clear indication of their color, since the Ethiopians were definitely black to the Romans. Ancient Jewish legends themselves recognize a Negro strain among the Jews. Boom, there it is. Especially down here, when we drop down, we've read this before, the third paragraph highlighted, it reads, especially dark were the Jews of Spain and Portuguese. The Portuguese Jews were very dark, says Pritchard. All right? And it says, so dark were the Jews, especially of Portugal and southern Spain, that many whites thought all Jews were black or dark. And there you have it. Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 14. Is Israel a servant? Is he a homeborn slave? Why is he spoiled? One thing is for sure, that the Most High's truth will prevail and prophecy will happen. There's no stopping that. And so I leave you, brethren, and I say shalom to all of Israel. Shalom, Israel.